Rosalie Bennett's hands were still covered in blood when the giant cowboy filled her doorway. She had just delivered another woman's baby, another child placed into arms that weren't hers. 7 years of empty arms. 7 years of burying grief beneath other women's joy, while the town whispered behind her back about the fat midwife who couldn't keep a husband or carry a child. Then Cole Brennan spoke 5 words that split her world open. "I need you. Come with me." No courtship, no flowers, just a mountain man offering her the one thing she'd sworn she'd never reach for again: hope. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. Rosalie Bennett wiped the blood from her hands with a rag that had seen better days and leaned against the doorframe of Nettie Grove's boarding house. Her substantial frame filled the space, her work dress strained across her middle, damp with sweat from 3 hours of hard labor, not her own, but Helen Patterson's. Inside, Helen was crying, not from pain anymore, but from the overwhelming joy of holding her newborn son for the first time. The sound cut through Rosalie like a blade she'd learned to expect, but never learned to tolerate. She'd done this 100 times, maybe more. She'd lost count somewhere around the 3rd year in Ember Hollow, this dying mining town tucked into the Colorado mountains where people came to disappear and stayed because leaving required more hope than most could muster. "Beautiful boy," Nettie whispered, standing beside Rosalie with a cup of coffee she knew wouldn't be touched. The older woman's silver hair caught the lamplight. "You did good work tonight." "I always do good work," Rosalie said flatly. "That ain't what I meant, and you know it." Rosalie didn't answer. She folded the bloody rag into a neat square and tucked it into her leather medical bag, the bag she'd carried across 3 states and 7 years of running from a life that had shattered in Boston like cheap glass on marble floors. "You gonna stand out here all night?" Nettie asked. "Just catching my breath?" "You're lying, Rosalie Bennett. You've been catching your breath for 7 years. Nettie's voice dropped lower. At some point, a woman's got to start breathing again. Rosalie turned to look at Nettie. 60 years old, sharp as a skinning knife, the only person in Ember Hollow who knew the whole truth about why a trained midwife had ended up delivering babies in a town that was slowly bleeding to death as the silver mine ran dry. "I breathe just fine," Rosalie said. "You survive just fine." That ain't the same thing, and any woman past 50 knows the difference. Inside the room, Helen Patterson laughed, a sound so pure and full of wonder that it pierced through Rosalie's carefully constructed walls. She'd made that sound once. Twice, actually. Both times the joy had turned to ash before she could hold it long enough to believe it was real. "I'm going home," Rosalie said, picking up her bag. "It's past midnight." "The walk will do me good." Nettie caught her arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Rosalie, one of these days, you're going to have to stop punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault." Rosalie gently pulled free. "Good night, Nettie." The road from the boarding house to Rosalie's small cabin wound through the center of Ember Hollow, a town that had seen better days and knew it. The silver mine that had built this place was running thin, and everyone could feel the slow dying of a community that had once thrived on what the mountain gave up from its belly. Rosalie walked fast, the way she always did when the grief came hunting. Her boots struck the packed dirt with purpose, each step a small declaration of defiance against the weight she carried. Not just the physical weight that made children stare and women whisper, but the emotional weight that pressed down on her chest until breathing became a conscious choice. She kept her eyes straight ahead because looking at the houses on either side meant seeing the lives she'd helped create, but could never have for herself. The Dane house. She'd delivered Tommy Dane, now 10 years old, 3 weeks after his father died in the mine. The boy had been breech. She'd saved him with hands that knew exactly what to do, even when her heart was screaming that it wasn't fair. Wasn't fair that she could bring other women's children into the world, but couldn't keep her own. The Henderson place. Twin girls born a month early. Both surviving because Rosalie had steady hands and a stubborn refusal to let death win, even when death felt like the easier option for everyone involved. The Carvers, the Mitchells, the Burkes, every family in Ember Hollow owed her something, and not one of them could give her the thing she actually wanted. She was 35 years old. She'd buried 2 babies, one at 4 months, one at 6. and a marriage that had died somewhere between the second miscarriage and the moment she'd found her husband's coat on the floor of his nurse's apartment. Dr. William Bennett, brilliant surgeon, faithless husband, the man who'd looked at her across their kitchen table after the second loss and said, "Perhaps you simply weren't made for motherhood, Rosalie, and perhaps—" He'd paused, his eyes traveling over her rounded figure with barely concealed disgust. "Perhaps your body is telling you something you refuse to hear." She still heard those words in the dark, every single night. Her cabin appeared ahead, small, square, and exactly as empty as she'd left it. She was reaching for the door latch when she heard hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate, coming down the mountain road at a pace that said the rider had purpose but wasn't in a panic. Rosalie turned. The horse came first, a massive black gelding with a chest like a barrel and legs thick as fence posts. Then the rider, and Rosalie felt her breath stop, the way it always did when Cole Brennan came down from his mountain. He was the biggest man she'd ever seen, 6'4" of weathered muscle, dark hair wild from wind, beard untrimmed, hands wrapped around the reins like they could crush stone. He wore no hat. Cole Brennan never wore a hat, which the other ranchers found peculiar and the women in town found secretly thrilling. He reined up 10 feet from her porch and didn't dismount. "You're out late," she said, because silence with Cole Brennan felt dangerous in ways she didn't want to examine. "So are you." "I was delivering a baby." "I know. That's why I'm here." Something cold moved through Rosalie's chest. "Is someone hurt up at your place? One of your hands?" "No." "Then why?" "I need to talk to you, Rosalie." He'd never called her by her first name before. In the 3 years she'd been aware of his existence, glimpses at the general store, a nodded greeting at the 4th of July gathering, the one time he'd brought an injured ranch hand to her door and stood in the rain waiting without a word of complaint. He had always called her ma'am or Mrs. Bennett, even after she'd told him twice she wasn't married anymore. "It's midnight, Mr. Brennan. I know what time it is. And you rode 2 hours down a mountain in the dark to talk to me?" "Yes, ma'am." "About what?" He was quiet for a moment. The gelding shifted beneath him, and she could hear the leather creak. Then Cole Brennan swung down from the saddle with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size, and he walked toward her porch with slow, deliberate steps, the steps of someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was terrified of getting it wrong. He stopped at the bottom of her steps. Even standing below her, his eyes were nearly level with hers. "I need a wife," he said. Flat, plain, like stating the price of feed. Rosalie stared at him. "Excuse me?" "I need a wife. And you need—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "You need a reason to stop delivering other women's babies while your own arms stay empty." The words hit her like a mule kick to the chest. She actually stepped backward, her hand flying to the porch rail for balance. Nobody talked about that. Nobody in Ember Hollow ever mentioned Rosalie's losses, her empty house, the way she always left christenings early. It was the town's unspoken agreement, pretend Rosalie Bennett was whole. "How dare you?" she whispered. "I ain't trying to hurt you." "Well, you're doing a fine job of it anyway." "I'm trying to be honest. That's the only thing I know how to be." "You don't know anything about me." "I know you've been alone for 7 years. I know you walk home from every delivery with your head down and your fists clenched. I know you keep your curtains closed on Christmas morning because you can't stand seeing families through the glass." His voice dropped lower. "And I know you deserve better than what this town gives you, their gratitude in the daylight, and their pity when they think you ain't listening." Rosalie's hands were shaking. Not from cold, it was June and the mountain air was warm, but from the shock of being seen so completely by a man who barely spoke to anyone. "You've been watching me," she said. 3 years. I know how it sounds, but I ain't a man who makes decisions fast. I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" "Sure that you're the one I want." The simplicity of it stole her voice. She stood on her porch, clutching her medical bag like a shield, and looked down at this enormous, quiet man who had apparently spent 3 years studying her from a distance, before riding down a mountain at midnight to propose marriage with all the romance of a livestock auction. "Mr. Brennan." "Cole." "Mr. Brennan, I'm a 35-year-old divorced woman who has lost 2 babies and can't promise she can carry a third. I'm... She hesitated, then forced the words out. I'm not what any man needs for a wife. Look at me. I'm not what anyone wants. The wait comment hung in the air between them, heavy with all the years of sideways glances, the whispered comments, the way William's eyes had traveled over her body with increasing disdain as their marriage crumbled. Cole's expression didn't change. That ain't your decision to make. The response caught her off guard. I beg your pardon? You're telling me what I need, but you don't know what I need. I do. He took one step up, closing the distance between them. I need someone who ain't afraid of hard truth. Someone who can look at blood and suffering and still show up the next morning. Someone who's been broken and put herself back together with her own 2 hands instead of waiting for someone else to do it. He paused. I need a woman strong enough to survive a winter on that mountain, strong enough to face down fear. And strength don't come in one size, Rosalie. The way he said her name, like it was something valuable, made her throat close. That's a pretty speech for a man who claims he doesn't talk much. I've had 3 years to write it. A laugh escaped her, broken and unexpected and almost painful. She pressed her hand over her mouth as if she could push it back in. I can't give you children, she said, and the words cost her everything. The doctors in Boston said, I heard what they said. Nettie told me. Nettie had no right. She had every right. She loves you, and she's been watching you die by inches for 7 years, same as I have. Cole's voice went rough. I ain't asking you for children, Rosalie. I'm asking you for a partner. Someone to share the work and the silence and the long winters when the snow cuts us off from everyone and everything. And if there are no children ever, then there are no children, and I'll still have the only woman I've ever wanted sitting across from me at supper, and that'll be enough. Rosalie turned away from him because she couldn't let him see her face. The tears came anyway, hot and fast and angry, because she had built such careful walls around this wound, and this man had walked right through them like they were made of paper. You don't love me, she said to the darkness. You don't even know me. I know you better than you think. And love, he paused. Love is something I figure we'll find along the way if you'll let us try. And if we don't find it, then we'll have respect and honesty and someone to count on. That's more than most married folks can say. She turned back to face him. His expression was open, vulnerable, this giant man who could break horses and split logs with his bare hands, standing on her porch steps looking like he might shatter if she said no. Why me? She asked. There are younger women, women who can... I don't want younger. I want you. Because I'm convenient? Because I'm the town midwife and nobody else will have me? Something flashed in his dark eyes. Not anger, but hurt. Is that what you think of yourself? That you're someone a man settles for? It's what I know. Then you don't know enough. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I wrote terms, fair ones. You keep your work. You keep your own room until you say otherwise. You keep your name if you want it. I provide the home, the security, the protection. You provide... He stopped. What? Yourself, just yourself. That's all I've ever wanted. Rosalie took the paper with trembling fingers. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. The penmanship of a man who'd learned his letters by firelight and valued every word he put to page. The terms were more than fair. They were generous in ways that made her chest ache. You wrote this yourself, she said. Took me 2 weeks. There's a clause here about my medical supplies. I built shelves in the spare room, for your bag and your medicines, if you want them. The detail undid her, not the grand gesture, not the practical terms, but the image of this solitary mountain man building shelves in an empty room for a woman who hadn't agreed to come yet, building them on hope alone. I need time, she said. Take what you need. But Rosalie... He stepped back down, his boots hitting the dirt with solid weight. Don't take too long on account of fear. Fear's kept both of us alone long enough. He mounted his horse with that impossible grace, and she watched him ride back up the mountain road until the darkness swallowed him whole. Rosalie stood on her porch for a long time after he left. The paper was warm in her hands, and somewhere inside Ember Hollow, Helen Patterson was nursing her newborn son, and the world was doing what it always did, moving forward, making life, filling arms that weren't Rosalie's. She went inside and lit her lamp, sat at her small table, read the contract 3 times. Then she opened the drawer where she kept the 2 small blankets she'd knitted 7 years ago, one blue, one yellow, for babies who never drew breath. She touched them gently, the wool soft under her calloused fingers. "What do you think?" she whispered to the empty room. "Am I brave enough?" The knock at her door came early the next morning. Rosalie had barely slept. Cole Brennan's words circled in her mind like hawks over a canyon, refusing to settle, refusing to let her rest. She opened the door expecting Nettie. It was Tommy Dane, 10 years old, thin as a fence post, dirt on his face, holding a dead rabbit by the ears. "Morning, Mrs. Bennett." "Tommy." Rosalie blinked sleep from her eyes. "What are you doing here at this hour?" "Mr. Brennan said to bring you this." Tommy held up the rabbit proudly. "He came by our place at dawn, told my mama he'd fix our roof this week if I'd run an errand for him." Rosalie looked at the rabbit, then at the boy. "Cole Brennan sent you?" "Yes, ma'am. He caught it himself this morning. Said you probably forgot to eat last night and he reckoned you'd need breakfast." The rabbit was freshly cleaned, ready for the skillet. Rosalie took it with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. "Did he say anything else?" Tommy scrunched his face, remembering. "He said to tell you the shelves are finished." The boy looked suddenly shy. "And he said you're the bravest woman he's ever known, and he ain't afraid to wait." Rosalie's throat closed. She knelt down to Tommy's level, this fatherless boy she'd brought into the world with her own hands, and she saw in his earnest eyes the same loneliness she carried in her own. "Tommy, do you know Mr. Brennan well?" "He lets me help with his horses sometimes when Mama can spare me." Tommy's expression grew serious, far too old for 10. "He's real big, Mrs. Bennett, but he's gentle. He talks to the horses like they're people. And once when I fell off the fence rail, he carried me all the way home and didn't say nothing about me crying." "Didn't say anything," Rosalie corrected automatically. Tommy grinned. "See? That's why he wants to marry you. He said you can't help fixing things, even when they ain't broke." After Tommy left, Rosalie cooked the rabbit and ate it standing at the window, watching the mountain road that led to Cole Brennan's ranch. Somewhere up there, a giant man was waiting for her answer, and the terrifying truth was that she already knew what it would be. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The visitors started arriving by noon. Word traveled in Ember Hollow the way fire traveled through dry brush, fast, unpredictable, and impossible to contain. Nettie came first, shameless and unrepentant. "I see that look on your face, Rosalie Bennett. You're going to say yes." "I haven't decided anything." "You cooked his rabbit. That's deciding." "It was food, Nettie. I was hungry." "A woman don't cook a man's rabbit unless she's considering cooking for him permanent. That's mountain law. That's nonsense. It's romance is what it is, and Lord knows you could use some." Mrs. Burke came next with her particular brand of Christian concern, her eyes sweeping over Rosalie's form with the practiced disapproval of a woman who measured virtue by dress size. "Rosalie, dear, I hope you'll think carefully about this. A woman in your position, divorced, and well—" She paused delicately. "People will talk." "People already talk, Mrs. Burke. They've been talking about me for 7 years. But marriage to Cole Brennan? The man's practically a hermit, lives up that mountain like some kind of wild creature. Nobody really knows him. Maybe that's because nobody bothered to try." Harold Creek appeared in the afternoon, which surprised Rosalie. The mine owner rarely visited anyone without a business reason, and he arrived at her door with his usual polished smile and his kid leather gloves, looking as out of place on her modest porch as a silk ribbon on barbed wire fence. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, tipping his hat, "mind if I come in?" "I'd rather you didn't, Mr. Creek." "What can I do for you?" Something flickered behind his pleasant expression, annoyance maybe at being kept on a porch like a peddler. "I heard about Brennan's little proposal. Wanted to offer my congratulations." "There's nothing to congratulate yet." Of course. He leaned against the rail, casual as a cat. "But if you do decide to accept, well, I hope you'll consider the complications." "What complications?" "Brennan's ranch sits on valuable land, Rosalie. Water rights, mineral deposits, timber. A married man with a wife to protect might be more reasonable about certain business arrangements than a stubborn bachelor with nothing to lose." Rosalie felt cold spread through her stomach. Are you suggesting that my marrying Cole Brennan would somehow benefit your business interests? I'm suggesting that a smart woman thinks about all the angles before making a big decision. His smile didn't change, but his eyes went flat. Brennan's father didn't think about the angles, made things harder than they needed to be for everyone. Cole's father died in your mind, Mr. Creek. A terrible accident, tragic. He straightened his gloves. I'd hate to see history repeat itself, wouldn't you? He tipped his hat again and walked away, leaving Rosalie standing on her porch with the taste of copper in her mouth, and the sudden fierce certainty that Cole Brennan needed someone watching his back more than he needed a wife. She sat at her table that evening, Cole's contract on one side, her 2 baby blankets on the other. The rabbit's bones were clean on her plate. Outside, the summer sun was finally dropping behind the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. She thought about William, her ex-husband, who had promised her love and given her loneliness, who had looked at her changing body after each pregnancy with increasing disgust, who had made her feel like her weight was a moral failing rather than simple biology. She thought about Harold Creek's flat eyes and careful threats. She thought about Tommy Dane's earnest face and Cole Brennan building shelves for a woman who hadn't said yes. And she thought about fear, how it had kept her safe for 7 years, and how safe and alive were not the same thing at all. Rosalie picked up her pen, signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Then she folded the 2 baby blankets, placed them gently inside her medical bag alongside her instruments and medicines, and began to pack. Tomorrow she would ride up the mountain. Tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Rosalie Bennett fell asleep without crying. The ride up the mountain took longer than Rosalie expected. The trail switched back and forth through rocky ground, and her borrowed mare, Nettie's old paint horse, picked her way carefully over loose stone and exposed roots. Rosalie's medical bag hung from the saddle horn, and her small trunk of belongings was strapped behind her, bouncing with every step. She'd left Ember Hollow before dawn, telling no one except Nettie. But Nettie being Nettie, the whole town probably knew by breakfast. The mare labored beneath Rosalie's weight, and she felt the familiar shame creep up her neck. Even the horse knew she was too much. But she pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the rhythm of hoofbeats and the slow unveiling of the landscape as they climbed higher. The ranch appeared around a sharp bend in the trail, a solid log house tucked into a natural clearing with a barn, a corral, and a view that made Rosalie's chest tighten for reasons she couldn't name. Cole was standing by the corral fence, and she knew from the way he was gripping the top rail that he'd been watching the trail since first light. He didn't move as she approached, just stood there, massive and still, like something carved from the mountain itself. "You came," he said. "I signed the contract." Signing and showing up ain't the same thing. Rosalie dismounted, her body protesting the long ride. She pulled her medical bag free, acutely aware of how she must look, rumpled, sweating, her dress stretched tight across her middle after hours in the saddle. "Well, I'm here. Are you going to help me with my trunk, or are we going to stand here stating facts at each other all morning?" Something moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or the ghost of a smile. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and lifted her trunk off the horse with one hand like it weighed nothing. "Your room's ready," he said. "Shelves and all." "I know. You told Tommy Dane." "I told Tommy Dane a lot of things. Boy's got a mouth like a church bell." He paused. "Did he tell you the part about being the bravest woman I ever knew?" "He did." "I meant it." "I know you did. That's why I'm here." He led her inside, and Rosalie stopped in the doorway of the spare room. The shelves were beautiful, hand-planed pine, sanded smooth, fitted perfectly into the wall beside a window that caught the morning light. He'd built a small table beneath them, just the right height for mixing medicines, and there was a hook by the door for her medical bag. "You measured," she said quietly. "Measured what?" "My bag. These hooks are exactly the right width for my bag. You measured it." Cole shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "I might have had Tommy hold it up once while you weren't looking." Rosalie pressed her hand against the smooth pine shelf, and something cracked inside her chest. Not painfully, more like ice breaking on a spring river. This man had spent weeks preparing a space for her work, her identity, the thing that made her who she was. William had spent their entire marriage trying to make her smaller, and not just physically. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out rough. "It's just shelves." "No, it isn't." They stood in awkward silence until Cole cleared his throat. "I reckon we should talk about how this works day to day. I reckon we should. I'm up at 4. Cattle don't care about sleeping in. I'll try to be quiet, but I'm a big man in a small house, so I'm up at 4 too. Babies don't keep schedules either." "Right." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I eat simple. Meat, bread, coffee. I can cook for myself if you don't want to. I'll cook, but you'll eat what I make, and I won't hear complaints about vegetables." "I don't complain. All men complain about vegetables." "I ain't all men." Rosalie looked up at him. This wall of a man with gentle eyes and hands that could crush stone but had sanded shelves smooth as glass for her medicines. "No," she said, "you're not." The first week passed in a strange dance of two people learning each other's rhythms. Rosalie discovered that Cole hummed while he worked, low, tuneless sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. She discovered he read by firelight every night, working his way through a battered copy of Emerson that had belonged to his mother. She discovered he talked to his horses the way she talked to her patients, calm, steady, honest. Cole discovered that Rosalie couldn't sit still. She organized his kitchen on the second day, his pantry on the third, and by the fourth day she'd scrubbed the entire house from floor to ceiling with a ferocity that left him standing in the doorway, bewildered. "It was clean before," he said. "It was clean by your standards. Your standards and mine are having a disagreement. My standards have lived here 12 years without complaint. Your standards didn't have to sleep in that bedroom. There was a cobweb the size of my hand above the window." "That was Earl." Rosalie stopped scrubbing. "You named a spider?" "He'd been there since March, kept the flies down." "Earl is gone, Cole." "I noticed." His voice was mournful, but his eyes held a warmth that made Rosalie's stomach flip in a way she wasn't prepared for. On the fifth day, Tommy Dane appeared on the trail, out of breath and wide-eyed. Rosalie heard his boots on the porch and opened the door to find him bent double, gasping. "Tommy, what's wrong?" "It's Mama. She's bleeding down there." His face was white with fear. "She told me to get you, said not to tell nobody else." Rosalie grabbed her medical bag without a second thought. "How long?" "Since last night. She tried to hide it, but I saw the rags in the wash basin this morning." "Is she standing? Walking?" "She was lying down when I left. She looked real scared, Mrs. Bennett." Cole appeared from the barn, reading the situation instantly. "Take my horse. He's faster." Rosalie didn't argue. She let Cole lift her onto the black gelding, his hands spanning her waist completely. No hesitation, no strain, just solid strength. And she rode down that mountain trail faster than she'd ever ridden anything in her life, Tommy clinging to the saddle behind her. Mary Dane was on her kitchen floor when they arrived, her nightgown soaked through with blood, her face the color of old candle wax. Rosalie knelt beside her and took her pulse. Weak, but steady. "How far along?" Rosalie asked, already knowing the answer from the curve beneath Mary's gown that she'd been hiding under loose dresses for weeks. 4 months. Mary's voice was thin as paper. "I didn't tell nobody. I thought if I didn't say it out loud, maybe this time—" "Hush, I need you quiet and still." Rosalie opened her bag and worked with hands that were steady even as her heart hammered. She'd seen this before, lived this before. The cruel irony of it, her body failing to hold life while her hands fought to save it in another woman, wasn't lost on her, but she shoved that pain into the locked room inside her chest where she kept everything that could destroy her. "Am I losing it?" Mary whispered. "Not if I can help it." Rosalie worked for 2 hours. Tommy sat on the porch steps, silent and terrified, his thin shoulders carrying a weight no 10-year-old should bear. When Rosalie finally emerged, her hands clean but her apron ruined, she found Cole Brennan sitting beside the boy. She didn't know when he'd come down the mountain. She didn't know how he'd known. But there he was, his massive frame somehow making itself small enough to sit on Mary Dane's narrow porch step, his arm around Tommy's shoulders. "She's stable," Rosalie said. "The baby's holding, but she needs bed rest, complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "Is she going to be okay?" "I'm going to make sure of it." Cole looked up at Rosalie, and something passed between them. A recognition of shared purpose, of being the kind of people who showed up when others needed them, regardless of the cost to themselves. "I'll bring food up from the ranch," Cole said. "Enough for a week, and I'll send one of my hands to help with their livestock." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." His voice was quiet but firm. "I want to." That night, back at the ranch, Rosalie sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Cole sat across from her, waiting with that patient silence she was learning to recognize as his way of offering space without abandonment. "She's 4 months along," Rosalie said finally. "Same as I was the first time." Cole didn't say anything, just waited. "I was alone when it happened. William was at the hospital, a surgery he couldn't leave," he said. She stared into the cold coffee. "By the time he came home, it was over. He found me on the bathroom floor, and you know what he said?" "Tell me." "He said, 'We'll try again.' Like I'd burned a roast, like the baby was something that could just be replaced." Her voice cracked. "The second time he wasn't even in the state. Conference in Boston. I bled for 6 hours before the neighbor heard me screaming." Cole's hands tightened on the table edge. She could hear the wood creak under his grip. "After that, he started coming home later, staying away longer. I told myself it was grief, that he was grieving in his own way. But grief doesn't smell like another woman's perfume." Rosalie set her cup down. "And grief doesn't look at you like—" She stopped. "Like what?" "Like you're disgusting, like your body is the problem, like if you'd just been different, smaller, more disciplined, maybe—" The words choked off. Cole stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. He didn't touch her. Just knelt there, this enormous man making himself small, his eyes level with hers. "That man was a fool," he said. "A damn fool who didn't deserve what he had. Maybe, or maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't made for—" "Don't!" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Don't you ever finish that sentence. Not in this house. Not anywhere I can hear it." Rosalie's breath caught. "You held Mary Dane's life in your hands today," Cole continued. "You've held half this town's lives in your hands. You're made for more than that man could ever understand. And if he was standing in front of me right now, I'd—" He stopped, breathed. "I'd tell him he lost the best thing that ever happened to him. And I'd thank him for being stupid enough to let you go." Rosalie reached out and touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, rough with stubble, warm beneath her palm. It was the first time she'd touched him with intention, and the shock of it went through both of them like lightning through a dry tree. "You're a good man, Cole Brennan," she whispered. "I'm trying to be." She pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how close they were, how the firelight caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes, how his breathing had changed. "I should get some rest. I need to check on Mary first thing in the morning. I'll ride down with you." "You don't need to." "I want to." He stood, and the moment passed, but something had shifted between them. A wall reduced to rubble, a door cracked open that neither of them could close again. 2 days later, Dr. Wade Paulson arrived in Ember Hollow with a leather medical bag twice the size of Rosalie's, a diploma from Johns Hopkins framed in gilt, and the confident smile of a man who believed the frontier was a problem that education could solve. Rosalie was in the general store buying supplies for Mary Dane when she first heard his name. "A real doctor," Mrs. Burke announced to anyone within earshot. "With proper training. Mr. Creek hired him special. Said it's time Ember Hollow had legitimate medical care." Rosalie's hand tightened on the jar of honey she was holding. Legitimate. Mrs. Burke had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Well, you know what I mean, dear. You've done wonderful work, of course, but you're not actually a doctor, are you? I've delivered every child born in this town for 7 years. And we're grateful. But a real doctor, well, it's progress, isn't it?" Rosalie paid for her supplies and walked out without another word. Her jaw ached from clenching, and her chest burned with a fury she hadn't felt since William told her she wasn't made for motherhood. Cole was waiting with the horses outside. He took one look at her face, and his expression hardened. "What happened?" "Harold Creek hired a doctor. Apparently I'm not legitimate." "That's horse—" "Don't." She held up her hand. I know what it is. I know what he's doing. Creek wants me off balance, wants me feeling small, so I'll be easier to push around when he comes for your land. Cole's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time either of them had connected Creek's interest in their marriage to his interest in the ranch, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that settled like a stone in Rosalie's stomach. He came to see me, she said, before I accepted your proposal. He talked about your father, about accidents, about history repeating itself. The color drained from Cole's face. He turned away from her, and she could see the muscles in his back tighten beneath his shirt. My father went into that mine on a Tuesday morning. Creek told him there was a new vein worth checking, deep in the north shaft, the shaft that hadn't been reinforced since the previous spring. Cole, they pulled his body out 3 days later. Tunnel collapse. They said bad luck. His hands were fists at his sides. Creek bought his mining claim from my mother for a third of what it was worth while she was still wearing black. She was dead herself within the year. Grief, the doctor said, but I always thought it was something closer to surrender. Rosalie moved to stand beside him. Not touching, she'd learned that Cole needed space when the darkness came, but close enough that he could feel her there. How old were you? 16. And you went up the mountain after that? Enlisted first, spent 3 years watching men die in ways I can't talk about. Then I came home, buried my mother next to my father, and went up the mountain. Figured if I stayed away from people, people couldn't be taken from me. And then you came down for me. He turned to look at her, and the raw need in his eyes made her heart stutter. You were worth coming down for. Rosalie took his hand. His fingers closed around hers carefully, as if she were something breakable. She squeezed hard enough to let him know she wasn't. Harold Creek killed your father, she said quietly, and now he's positioning himself to take everything that's left. I know. The new doctor, that's not about medical care. That's about making me disposable. If I'm not needed in town, if I'm just Cole Brennan's wife with no purpose of my own, then threatening me becomes easier. I'm leverage instead of a person. Cole stared at her. You figured all that out from one conversation in a general store? I figured it out because I've been underestimated by powerful men before. They all use the same playbook. Make the woman feel small, take away her purpose, isolate her from her community. Her grip on his hand tightened. Creek doesn't know me very well if he thinks that's going to work. No, ma'am, he does not. Dr. Paulson introduced himself at church that Sunday. He was young, early 30s, with clean hands and a practiced manner that said Eastern Medical School from 20 paces. He shook Rosalie's hand with the careful politeness of a man meeting someone he intended to replace. Mrs. Brennan, he said, I've heard wonderful things about your work here. It's Bennett. I kept my name. Of course. Forgive me. His smile didn't falter. I hope you'll consider me a colleague rather than a competitor. There's certainly enough work in Ember Hollow for both of us. There's barely enough for one, Rosalie replied, which you'd know if you'd spent more than 3 days here. Cole, standing beside her, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. After the service, Harold Creek approached them with his usual polished ease. Cole, Mrs. Bennett, beautiful morning, isn't it? What do you want, Creek? Cole's voice carried no pretense of politeness. Just being neighborly, and I wanted to mention I'll be sending a surveyor up to the High Ridge next week. Routine assessment of the old mineral claims. Your mineral claims end at the tree line. The ridge is my land. Well, that's what the survey will determine, won't it? Creek smiled at Rosalie. I'm sure your wife appreciates a man who's thorough about property boundaries. Smart woman like her understands the value of cooperation. My wife, Cole said, stepping forward so that his shadow fell across Creek like a threat, appreciates a man who says what he means instead of hiding behind lawyers and surveyors. So let me be clear. Set foot on my land without an invitation, and you'll leave on a stretcher. Creek's smile didn't change, but something behind it went cold and flat, like a snake drawing back before a strike. Careful, Cole. Threats have consequences. So does murder. The word landed like a gunshot in the churchyard. People stopped talking. Reverend Matthews, halfway to the door, turned around with wide eyes. Creek's face went perfectly still. I don't know what you're implying, Creek said softly. I ain't implying anything. I'm stating a fact. My father went into your mine healthy and came out dead. You bought his claim for nothing while his widow was still crying, and now you're circling my land like you circled his." Cole's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried across the silent churchyard like thunder. "I ain't my father, Creek. I don't trust easy, and I don't die quiet." Creek held Cole's gaze for a long moment. Then he straightened his gloves, tipped his hat to Rosalie, and walked away without another word. The silence lasted until his buggy disappeared around the bend. Then the whispers started, sharp and fast and electric, the sound of a small town realizing that the ground beneath it had shifted. Nettie appeared at Rosalie's elbow. "Well, that's going to make the next town meeting interesting." "He shouldn't have said it," Rosalie murmured, watching Cole's back as he walked toward their horses. "Not here. Not in public." "Maybe not. But someone needed to say it. That man's been choking this town for 20 years, and everyone's been too scared or too comfortable to speak up." Nettie squeezed her arm. "Your husband just lit a match, Rosalie. Question is whether it burns Creek or burns you." Rosalie rode up the mountain beside Cole in silence. Halfway home, she finally spoke. "You know what you did back there." "I know." "You declared war in front of the whole town." "I told the truth. If that's war, then Creek started it 20 years ago. And now he'll come at us with everything he has, the surveyors, the doctor, the legal claims." That was the gentle approach. After today, he won't be gentle. Cole reined up and turned to face her. "Are you afraid?" Rosalie looked at this man, her husband in name, her partner, and something that was rapidly becoming more than either of them had planned for. The mountain wind caught her hair, pulling it loose from its pins, and she let it go. "I'm furious," she said. "There's a difference." Cole Brennan looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she'd never seen him do. He smiled. Not the ghost of a smile. Not the almost smile she'd been learning to read over the past 2 weeks. A real, full smile that transformed his weathered face into something close to beautiful. "I chose well," he said quietly. Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs like a fist on a locked door. "Take me home, Cole." He turned his horse up the trail, and she followed, and the word she'd used, home, echoed between them all the way up the mountain, growing warmer with every step. The trial in Silver Junction lasted 4 days. Rosalie and Cole made the journey together, leaving Tommy with Mary and Nettie, riding side by side down the mountain and across the valley with the evidence packed in Rosalie's medical bag, the same bag that had carried instruments of healing and tools of justice with equal purpose. Creek looked diminished in the courtroom. His Denver lawyer argued every point with expensive precision, challenging evidence, questioning motives, painting Cole and Rosalie as opportunists who had targeted a successful businessman out of jealousy and greed. Rosalie sat through it with her hands folded and her jaw set, acutely aware of the stares, not just at her face but at her body, the way she filled the courtroom bench, the whispers that followed her even here. The lawyer's eyes traveled over her with barely concealed disdain when he addressed her, as if her physical presence somehow undermined her credibility. Cole sat beside her, rigid, his father's pocket watch gripped in his fist beneath the table. On the second day, the prosecution called a surprise witness, a retired miner named Ezekiel Potts, who had worked at Creek's operation in 1858. The old man shuffled to the stand with the careful steps of someone whose body had been broken by decades underground, and his testimony cracked the case wide open. "I was there the morning Samuel Brennan went into the north shaft," Potts said, his voice thin but steady. "Creek told him there was a new vein worth checking. I told Samuel the timbers looked wrong, said we should wait for the inspector. Creek pulled me aside and told me to keep my mouth shut if I wanted to keep working." "And what happened next?" the prosecutor asked. "I heard the collapse from the surface. Sounded like the mountain itself was breaking apart." Potts' hands trembled on his knees. "Creek was standing right beside me. He didn't even flinch, just checked his watch and said, 'Well, that's unfortunate,' like a man who'd lost a hand of cards, not a man whose worker had just died." The courtroom erupted. Creek's lawyer demanded a recess. The judge denied it. "Why didn't you come forward before now?" the prosecutor asked. Potts looked directly at Creek. "Because he paid me to leave town the next day, gave me $200, and told me that if I ever came back to Colorado, I'd end up in a shaft of my own." The old man straightened in his chair with the dignity of someone finally laying down a burden they'd carried too long. I've been living with that money and that shame for 20 years. When I heard what happened in Ember Hollow, what that woman did, the midwife who wouldn't back down, I figured if she could be brave enough to face him, so could I. Rosalie felt Cole's hand find hers under the table. His grip was crushing, and she squeezed back just as hard. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Creek was found guilty of murder in the first degree, fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. The judge sentenced him to hang. Creek stood for sentencing with his shoulders hunched, his gloves gone, his polished veneer stripped away to reveal the smallness beneath. As the deputies moved to take him, he turned and looked at Rosalie one final time. She expected hatred. She expected threats. Instead, she saw exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had spent 20 years maintaining a lie and had finally been allowed to stop. "You were right," he said. His voice was barely audible. "About my conscience." Then they took him away, and Rosalie sat in the courtroom and breathed deep, slow, deliberate breaths, while Cole pressed his father's pocket watch against his heart and wept for the first time since he was 16 years old. They stayed in Silver Junction that night, in a small hotel room with a creaking bed and thin walls. Cole laid his head in Rosalie's lap and told her about his father. Not the facts she already knew, but the memories. How Samuel Brennan had taught him to ride by putting him on a horse before he could walk. How his father had read to him every night from a book of poems that had been his own mother's. How the last thing Samuel ever said to his son was, "Take care of the mountain, boy. It'll take care of you." "He was right," Rosalie said, running her fingers through Cole's hair. "The mountain brought you to me." "The mountain didn't do anything. You came to it. We both did. Two broken people running from different things, ending up in the same place." "Not broken anymore?" "No, not anymore." They rode home the next morning. Ember Hollow met them at the town line. Not just Nettie and Tommy and Mary, but the miners and their families, the shopkeepers, the ranchers from the valley, Reverend Matthews, even Mrs. Burke, who had apparently undergone a conversion from disapproving church lady to enthusiastic supporter somewhere during the trial. Tommy reached them first, sprinting ahead of the crowd to grab Cole's stirrup and run alongside the horse. "Did they get him? Is it over?" "It's over, son," Cole said, and the word came as naturally as breathing now. "He's going to hang." Tommy's face hardened with satisfaction, too old for his years. "Good. He hurt my mama. He hurt everybody." Cole dismounted and knelt in front of the boy. "Tommy, listen to me. What Creek did was evil, and he's paying for it. But I don't want you carrying hate around like a stone in your pocket. It'll weigh you down until you can't move forward. You understand? Is that what happened to you on the mountain?" Cole looked at this boy, this child who saw everything, understood everything, forgave nothing, and feared nothing, and nodded. "That's exactly what happened to me. And it took a very stubborn woman to make me put the stone down. Mrs. Bennett." "Rosalie," Cole corrected gently. Tommy looked between them, processing this with the rapid calculation of a child who had learned to read adults the way other children read books. Then he threw his arms around Cole's neck and said, "I'm glad she made you come down." "Me too, son. Me too." The months that followed reshaped Ember Hollow from the inside out. Cole's Ridge operation grew from a handful of displaced miners into a functioning cooperative, with families building homes on plots he'd parceled out along the mountain's western face. Jem Carver turned out to have a gift for carpentry that rivaled his mining skills, and the sound of hammers and saws replaced the mine's constant rumble as the dominant rhythm of the town. Rosalie's clinic expanded. Paulson stayed on as her partner, a real partner now, not a replacement. Together they handled everything from rattlesnake bites to tuberculosis to the endless parade of broken bones and torn muscles that accompanied the building boom. Mary Dane's pregnancy progressed without incident. Rosalie monitored her with obsessive attention, checking her pulse and blood pressure twice daily, adjusting her diet, restricting her activity whenever the numbers shifted even slightly. "You're hovering," Mary said one afternoon as Rosalie listened to the baby's heartbeat for the third time that hour. "I'm being thorough. You're being a mother hen with one chick. I have 2 chicks, you and Tommy. 3 if you count Cole. Cole Brennan is nobody's chick. You haven't seen him when he gets a cold. The man acts like he's dying. Mary laughed, and the sound made Rosalie's heart lift in a way she'd stopped trying to analyze. This was her family, messy, improbable, assembled from broken pieces that somehow fit together better than anything factory made. On a Tuesday morning in late September, with the aspen trees turning gold on the mountainside and the air carrying the first sharp bite of autumn, Rosalie woke up sick. Not the kind of sick she'd been treating in other people for 7 years. A different kind. A familiar kind. She made it to the basin before she lost everything in her stomach, then sat on the bedroom floor with her back against the wall and her hand pressed flat against her abdomen. "No," she whispered. "Don't you dare hope. Don't you dare." Cole found her there 10 minutes later. He dropped to his knees so fast she heard them crack against the wooden floor. "Rosalie, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "You're on the floor." "I'm fine, Cole." "You're crying and you're on the floor. Those two things together have never once meant fine in the history of the word." She looked at him, this giant, gentle, impossible man who had ridden down a mountain for her, and she couldn't hold it in anymore. "I think I'm pregnant." Cole Brennan, who had faced down murderers without flinching, who had testified in court with steady hands and a clear voice, who had survived a war and 20 years of solitary grief, went completely white and sat down on the floor beside her with a thud that shook the house. "Say that again," he said. "I think I'm pregnant. I'm late. I'm sick. She pressed both hands against her stomach. "Cole, I'm terrified. The doctor said—" "The doctors didn't know you." His voice cracked. "The doctors didn't know what you're capable of. What if it happens again? What if I lose? Then we face it together, same as everything else." He pulled her against his chest, and she could feel his heart hammering like a horse at full gallop. "But Rosalie, what if it doesn't happen again? What if this time is different?" "I'm afraid to believe that." "I know. I was afraid to believe I could come down from that mountain. I was afraid to believe you'd sign that contract. I was afraid to believe you could love me." His arms tightened. "Being afraid doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means you're about to get the thing you wanted most." Rosalie buried her face against his neck and held on. She told no one for the first 2 months. Only Cole knew, and he guarded the secret with the same fierce protectiveness he applied to everything he loved. He watched her like a hawk, adjusting her workload without being asked, making sure she ate even when the nausea made food seem impossible, lying awake beside her through the nights when fear pressed close and the memories of Boston threatened to swallow everything. At 8 weeks, she told Paulson. He examined her with careful hands and honest eyes. "Everything looks good, Rosalie. Strong pulse, no spotting. Your body is handling this well." "My body failed before." "Your body was under different circumstances before. Different stress, different support, different everything." He met her gaze. "You're not the same woman who lost those babies, and this isn't the same situation." At 12 weeks, she told Nettie. The older woman sat down hard in her boarding house kitchen and cried for 10 minutes straight. "I knew it," Nettie said when she could speak. "I knew it. The morning after your real wedding, you had a look about you." "What kind of look?" "The look of a woman who's finally stopped running from her own life." At 14 weeks, Mary Dane went into labor. Rosalie was at her side from the first contraction, her hands steady, her voice calm, while inside her own body another life was growing, proof that broken things could mend, that verdicts could be overturned, that the story wasn't over just because someone had written the end too soon. Mary's daughter arrived at sunset, screaming with the full-throated fury of a child who intended to be heard. Rosalie placed the baby in Mary's arms and stepped back, and for the first time in her career, she didn't feel the knife twist of envy. She felt joy, pure, uncomplicated, overflowing, because this time her arms weren't empty. "She's perfect," Mary whispered. "She's loud," Tommy observed from the doorway. "She's both," Rosalie said. "That's the best combination." Mary looked up at Rosalie with knowing eyes. "You're showing." Rosalie's hand went to her belly, where the slight curve was just beginning to press against her dress. The weight she'd carried her whole life, the weight that had made her a target for cruel words and crueler glances, was changing now, becoming something else. Something sacred. I was going to tell you after. I know. Mary's smile was radiant. Our girls are going to grow up together. We don't know it's a girl. I know. Rosalie laughed, and the sound brought Cole in from the porch, where he'd been waiting with the anxious energy of a man who understood the stakes of childbirth better than most husbands ever would. He looked at Mary and the baby. He looked at Tommy, who was already reaching for his new sister with trembling, reverent hands. He looked at Rosalie, standing in the lamplight with one hand on her belly and tears on her face, and the medical bag at her feet that had carried everything she was and everything she'd fought for. Come here, Rosalie said. He crossed the room and stood behind her, his hands covering hers over the curve where their child grew. Your father would be so proud of you, she said. Cole pressed his face against her hair, and she felt his tears, warm and silent, falling into the place where grief had lived for 20 years, and love had finally taken root. 5 months later, on a February morning when the snow lay deep across Ember Hollow and the mountain wore a crown of ice, Rosalie Bennett gave birth to a son. Cole delivered the baby himself, his hands shaking, his face ashen, his voice steady only because Rosalie was steady first. You're doing this, she told him through gritted teeth. Don't you dare faint on me, Cole Brennan. I ain't fainting, I'm praying. Pray faster. The baby came into the world with a cry that rattled the windows, and Cole caught his son with hands that had broken horses and fought for justice and built shelves for a woman's medicine bag. He held the boy up to the light, and his face, that weathered, guarded, beautiful face, broke open like a dam. He's here, Cole said. Rosalie. He's here. Rosalie reached for her son, and when he was placed against her chest, she felt the last locked door inside her swing wide. Her body, the body that had carried shame for so long, that had been called wrong and broken and insufficient, had done this impossible thing, had created life, had held it, had brought it into the world whole and perfect and screaming with righteous fury. The room was full. Nettie, Paulson, Mary, with her baby girl on her hip, Tommy pressed against Cole's side. All of them crying, all of them laughing, all of them home. What's his name, was? Tommy asked. Rosalie looked at Cole. He nodded once. Samuel, she said. Samuel Cole Brennan. Cole knelt beside the bed and pressed his forehead against his son's. This tiny, perfect, impossible child who existed because two lonely people had been brave enough to sign a contract and foolish enough to fall in love. Welcome to the mountain, Samuel, he whispered. You've got a mama who won't quit, a brother who'll teach you to ride, and a father who came down from the clouds for the woman who taught him how to live. He kissed his son's forehead. You were worth the wait, all of it, every year, every mile, every single lonely night. Rosalie pulled Cole close until all three of them were tangled together, husband, wife, son. Outside the window, Ember Hollow was alive with the sounds of a town rebuilt from the ashes of one man's greed by the stubborn, impractical, magnificent love of two people who had found each other at the end of the world and made it new. The pocket watch sat on the bedside table, its face catching the winter light, still ticking after all these years. Samuel Brennan's legacy. Not the land, not the mine, not the mountain, but the simple radical belief that love was worth coming down for. And Rosalie Bennett, who had buried 2 babies and a broken heart and crossed 3 states to find a place where she could stop running, finally closed her eyes, held her living son against her beating heart, and knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she was always meant to be. Not because a contract told her so, not because a mountain man proposed at midnight, but because she had chosen this life with open eyes and steady hands, and a courage she didn't know she had until someone believed in it before she did. That was the truth of it. That was the whole story. Love didn't rescue Rosalie Bennett. Rosalie Bennett rescued herself. And then she let Cole Brennan walk beside her, not ahead, not behind, but right there at her shoulder, into a future that was better than anything she'd ever dared to dream. She had spent 35 years being told her body was wrong. Too much, too heavy, too broken. Incapable of the one thing women were supposed to do. And now that body, scarred and strong and magnificently stubborn, cradled new life against skin that had learned to carry both shame and strength with equal measure. Cole's hand covered hers on Samuel's back, and she looked up at him through tears that blurred everything except his face. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For building shelves." He smiled, that full transformative smile that still had the power to stop her breath. "I'd build 1,000 shelves for you, Rosalie Bennett. I'd build a whole house. I'd build a whole world." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, her cheek, finally her mouth. "You already gave me mine." Tommy squeezed between them, his eyes fixed on his new brother with fierce, protective love already blazing in his young face. "Can I hold him?" "Sit down first," Rosalie said, and Tommy settled beside her on the bed with exaggerated care. She placed Samuel in his arms, adjusting his grip, showing him how to support the head. "He's real small," Tommy whispered. "He'll grow." "Will he look like you or Cole?" "Maybe both, maybe neither. Does it matter?" Tommy thought about this with the seriousness he brought to everything important. "No. He's ours either way." "Ours." The words settled over the room like a benediction. This family assembled from loneliness and loss and the stubborn refusal of broken people to stay broken. This family that looked nothing like what Rosalie had imagined in Boston in her old life when she'd believed family had to look a certain way, be a certain way, fit a certain mold. This family was better. Mary stepped forward with her daughter, barely 2 months old, sleeping against her shoulder. "They'll grow up together," Mary said softly. "Your son and my daughter. Playing in these mountains, learning these trails. They'll never know what it cost us to get here." "Yes, they will," Rosalie said. "We'll tell them. Every hard thing, every scared moment, every time we wanted to quit and didn't." She looked down at Samuel, his tiny face scrunched in sleep, his fist curled against Tommy's chest. "We'll tell them so they know that hard things are worth doing. That scared is not the same as stopped. That family is something you build, not something you're given." Nettie wiped her eyes with her apron. "Listen to you, philosopher and midwife and mother all in one. Just a woman who got tired of running. Just a woman who saved a town," Paulson said from the doorway. "Just a woman who brought down a murderer. Just a woman who proved every doubter wrong." He smiled. "You undersell yourself, Rosalie." She didn't answer. She was too busy watching Cole watch their son, the wonder on his face so naked and complete that it made her chest ache. This man had waited 3 years for her, had built shelves before she said yes, had knelt on her kitchen floor and told her she was made for more than one cruel man's verdict, had delivered their baby with shaking hands and unshakable faith. This man had chosen her when the whole world said she was unchoosable, and she had chosen him back. The fire crackled in the hearth. Snow fell outside the window. Samuel slept in Tommy's arms while Mary's daughter cooed softly. Nettie made coffee that no one would drink but everyone would hold. Paulson checked vitals with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned that sometimes the best medicine was simply bearing witness. And Rosalie Bennett, midwife, wife, mother, survivor, leaned back against the pillows and let herself feel it all. The joy, the terror, the bone-deep exhaustion, the shimmering, impossible hope. Her body had done this. The body that had been called too much, too heavy, too wrong. The body that had failed twice before. The body that had carried shame like a second skin for longer than she cared to remember. That body had grown a child, had birthed him, had done the thing everyone said it couldn't do. And if that wasn't a miracle, Rosalie didn't know what was. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and gathered her close, careful of her soreness, mindful of her strength. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I loved you before, but now—" His voice broke. "Now I don't have words for it." "Then don't use words." He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promises that had nothing to do with contracts or convenience, and everything to do with the choice they'd made every day since she rode up that mountain with a signed paper and a heart full of terror. The choice to try, to trust, to believe that broken things could be made whole if the right hands held them. Samuel stirred, making the small mewling sounds of a newborn testing his voice. Tommy looked up, panicked. "Is he okay?" "He's perfect," Rosalie said. "Bring him here." Tommy transferred the baby with exaggerated care, and Rosalie settled Samuel against her chest, skin to skin, feeling his heartbeat sync with hers. This was it. This was everything. This messy, imperfect, glorious life she'd built from the ruins of her old one. No fancy house in Boston, no surgeon husband with clean hands and a cold heart, no pretending to be smaller than she was, quieter than she was, less than she was. Just this: a log house on a mountain, a husband with rough hands and a gentle soul, a found son and a newborn one, a community rebuilt from ashes, a purpose larger than her pain. Just this. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Samuel was 3 weeks old when the letter arrived from Boston. Rosalie was nursing him in the rocking chair Cole had built, another thing he'd made with his hands for her comfort, when she heard the horse approaching. She looked out the window to see the mail carrier from town, which was unusual. Mail came once a month if they were lucky, and they'd just received it 2 weeks prior. Cole met the man at the door, exchanged a few words, and came inside holding a cream-colored envelope with handwriting Rosalie recognized immediately. Her stomach dropped. "It's from William," she said flatly. Cole's jaw tightened. "You want me to burn it?" "I want to know what he wants after 7 years of silence." She passed Samuel to Cole, something that still made her heart catch, the way this giant man cradled their tiny son with such exquisite gentleness, and opened the envelope. The letter was brief, written in William's precise medical script. Rosalie read it once, twice, then set it on the table with hands that trembled only slightly. "He's dying," she said. "Consumption. He's in a sanatorium outside Philadelphia. He says he wants to see me before—" She stopped. "He says there are things he needs to say." Cole's expression was carefully neutral. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." Rosalie stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had become home. "Part of me wants to throw that letter in the fire and pretend I never got it. Part of me wants to go just so I can tell him exactly what I think of him. And part of me," she pressed her hand against the glass, "part of me is curious what a dying man thinks is important enough to write for." "You don't owe him anything." "I know." "But you're going anyway." She turned to look at her husband. "How did you know?" "Because you're you. You deliver babies for women who can't pay. You saved Mary Dane when everyone else had written her off. You rode into Creek's camp knowing it could get you killed." He adjusted Samuel in his arms. "You don't leave things unfinished, even hard things, even cruel people who don't deserve your time." Rosalie crossed the room and kissed his cheek. "I'll take the train. Be gone a week at most. Will you be all right with Samuel?" "We'll manage. Mary's offered to help, and Nettie's already planning to move in and boss me around my own house." "Good." She touched Samuel's tiny hand, and his fingers curled around hers with that instinctive grip that still made her want to weep. "I need to do this. Not for him. For me. So I can close that door completely. Then go. But Rosalie," Cole caught her hand, "come back. Come back to us. Always." The journey to Philadelphia took 4 days by train and stagecoach. Rosalie watched the landscape change from mountains to plains to the crowded eastern cities she'd fled 7 years ago. The buildings pressed close. The air smelled of coal smoke and too many people living too close together. She felt suffocated within hours of arrival. The sanatorium was on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling brick building surrounded by manicured lawns that tried and failed to mask the smell of sickness that permeated everything. William was in a private room on the 3rd floor. The nurse who led Rosalie there looked her over with barely concealed disdain, taking in her sturdy traveling dress, her practical boots, her body that had carried and birthed a child and wore the evidence proudly. "He's very weak," the nurse said. Don't tire him." Rosalie wanted to laugh, as if she owed this man anything, least of all consideration for his comfort. William was propped against white pillows, his face gaunt, his once strong hands skeletal where they rested on the coverlet. He'd been a handsome man once. Now he looked like death was simply waiting for an invitation. His eyes widened when she entered. "Rosalie, you came. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would." He gestured weakly to the chair beside his bed. "Please, sit." She remained standing. "You have 10 minutes. Use them well." Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or the memory of when he'd had the power to hurt her and had used it liberally. You look, he stopped, coughed, continued. Different. I had a baby 3 weeks ago. A son. The words hit him like a physical blow. His face went even paler, if that was possible. But the doctors said, the doctors were wrong. Or maybe I just needed to be somewhere I wasn't constantly told my body was a failure. She kept her voice level, clinical. You said you had things to tell me. I'm listening. William closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. I was cruel to you after the miscarriages, after... He swallowed hard. I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. I made you feel like you were broken when the truth was I was the one who couldn't handle the grief. I was the one who turned to someone else instead of staying with my wife. I was the one who failed. Yes, Rosalie said simply. You were. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I'm so desperately sorry, Rosalie. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too proud and too cowardly to admit that I was scared. Scared of losing you the way we lost the babies. Scared of not being able to fix it. Scared of my own inadequacy. So you made me feel inadequate instead. Yes. They sat in silence. Outside, a bird sang. Somewhere down the hall, someone coughed wetly. Why did you ask me here? Rosalie asked finally. If it was just to apologize, you could have written that in your letter. I wanted to see you, to know that you were all right, that I hadn't... He stopped. That I hadn't destroyed you completely. You didn't destroy me, William. You hurt me. You abandoned me. You made me believe lies about myself for longer than I should have allowed. But you didn't destroy me. She leaned forward slightly. I rebuilt myself. I found work that mattered. I found a place that needed me. I found a man who sees my strength instead of my flaws. I found a family. Her voice grew stronger. I found everything you told me I couldn't have, and I did it without you. Because of you, maybe, but definitely without you. William's tears fell freely now. I'm glad. Truly. I'm glad you found happiness. I didn't find it. I chose it. There's a difference. She stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her bag. Rosalie, wait. There's something else. She turned back. The nurse who I... He couldn't finish. She died 2 years ago. Childbed fever. The baby died too. The cruelty of it should have given Rosalie some satisfaction, but it didn't. It just made her tired. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, and meant it. Not for him, but for the woman who died and the baby who never drew breath. For all the ways the world was harsh to women, whether they deserved it or not. After she died, I realized what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away. I tried to find you, but you'd disappeared. No forwarding address, no trace. He looked at her with desperate eyes. Can you forgive me? Rosalie thought about it, really thought about it. About all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep in that Boston apartment. About the shame she'd carried across 3 states. About the moment she'd signed Cole's contract with hands that shook because she was terrified of hoping again. About Samuel, asleep in his father's arms back on the mountain. About the life she'd built from the ruins of this one. I don't know if I forgive you, she said honestly, but I don't hate you anymore. And I don't need anything from you. Not your apology, not your regret, not your blessing. I stopped needing you the day I left, William. I just didn't know it yet. She walked to the door, then paused. I hope you find peace, whatever that looks like for you. But I'm not your absolution. You'll have to find that somewhere else. She left without looking back. The train ride home felt shorter. Rosalie spent it looking out the window, watching civilization give way to wilderness, watching the mountains rise in the distance like a promise kept. She thought about William, dying alone in that white room. She thought about the person she'd been when she married him, young, hopeful, believing that love meant sacrifice and self-erasure and making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. She thought about the person she was now, scarred, strong, stubborn as the mountains themselves. A woman who knew that love meant standing shoulder to shoulder, not one person kneeling while the other stood. A woman who had learned that her body was magnificent, not despite its size but because of everything it could do. Heal, birth, endure, survive. She thought about Cole waiting for her, about Samuel and Tommy and Mary and the whole improbable family she'd assembled from loneliness and loss. She thought about home. When the stagecoach finally crested the last ridge and Ember Hollow appeared below, Rosalie felt something in her chest release, a tension she hadn't known she was carrying. Cole was waiting at the station with both boys. Samuel was strapped to his chest in a sling Mary had made, sleeping peacefully against his father's heartbeat. Tommy stood beside them, holding the reins of both horses, trying very hard to look responsible and mostly succeeding. Rosalie climbed down from the coach, and Cole crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He kissed her hard, not caring who was watching, one hand cradling their son and the other cupping her face like she was something precious. "You came back," he said against her mouth. "I told you I would." "How was it?" "Necessary." And finished. She touched Samuel's head, soft dark hair just like his father's. "How were they?" "Tommy's been teaching Samuel about horses. I tried to explain that the boy's 3 weeks old and can't see past 5 feet, but Tommy says it's never too early to start education." Rosalie laughed, the sound ringing clear across the station platform, and took Tommy's hand. "He's absolutely right. Come on, take me home." They rode up the mountain as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tommy chattered about everything that had happened while she was gone. The new foal in the barn, the way Samuel had smiled, definitely smiled, not gas, Tommy insisted. How Nettie had reorganized their entire kitchen and Cole had been too afraid to stop her. Rosalie listened and smiled and felt the last piece of her old life fall away like a snake shedding dead skin. The ranch appeared around the bend, smoke rising from the chimney, lamplight glowing in the windows. Home. Not the house she'd imagined as a girl, not the life she'd planned with William, but something better, something real. Mary was waiting on the porch with her daughter, both of them bundled against the evening chill. She waved when she saw them, and Rosalie waved back, and the simple gesture felt like a benediction. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Rosalie and Cole sat by the fire. She told him about William, the apology, the regret, the death that was coming for him, whether he was ready or not. "How do you feel?" Cole asked. "Free," Rosalie said. "I thought I needed his apology to move on. I thought I needed him to admit he was wrong, to take back all the cruel things he said about my body, about my worth. But standing there in that room, looking at what was left of him," she shook her head. "I realized I didn't need any of it. I'd already moved on. I'd already built a life he couldn't touch. His apology didn't give me anything I didn't already have." Cole pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For going. Facing him. Coming back." He kissed the top of her head. "For choosing us. Easiest choice I ever made." The months turned to years. Samuel grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere and absorbed everything Tommy taught him. Mary's daughter, Grace, became Samuel's constant companion, the two of them racing through the mountain meadows like wild things, climbing trees and building forts, and coming home muddy and delighted. Tommy grew tall and serious, taking on more responsibility at the ranch, learning from Cole how to manage the cooperative that had replaced Creek's failing mine. The displaced miners became prosperous ranchers, their families thriving in the clean mountain air, their children learning to read in the schoolhouse Cole helped build and Rosalie helped fund. Paulson married a school teacher from Silver Junction and brought her to Ember Hollow, where she promptly started a lending library and a women's literacy circle that met every Thursday. Rosalie attended when she could, though between the clinic and her growing family, because yes, against all odds, there was a second baby, a daughter they named Hope, her time was precious. Nettie grew older but no less sharp, running her boarding house with the same fierce efficiency she brought to everything. She spoiled Samuel and Hope shamelessly, and they adored her with the uncomplicated devotion children reserve for people who sneak them cookies and tell them scandalous stories. The town transformed. Where Creek's operation had been extractive and exploitative, the cooperative was sustainable. They harvested timber carefully, rotated their cattle, maintained the water rights that Cole's father had died protecting. Ember Hollow didn't boom the way it had during the Silver Rush, but it survived. It thrived even. A quieter prosperity built on fairness rather than greed. And Rosalie became the heart of it all, without trying, without even noticing. She delivered babies and set bones and sat with dying miners and taught young mothers how to nurse and prescribe medicines from the shelves Cole had built for her all those years ago. She was 43 when she delivered her last baby, not her own, but Helen Patterson's fourth child, a girl with red hair and her mother's fierce will. Rosalie placed the baby in Helen's arms and stepped back, and realized with startling clarity that she was done. Not with medicine, never with medicine, but with the all-consuming work that had defined her for so long. She had other things now. A husband who still looked at her like she'd hung the moon. Children who needed her in different ways. A community that had learned to stand on its own. She could step back. She could let Paulson and the new doctor he'd trained take the emergency calls. She could be Rosalie Bennett Brennan. Not just the midwife, not just the healer, but the woman, the mother, the wife. The person who had traveled so far from that empty cabin in Ember Hollow to find herself on the other side of fear. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took her back to the porch where he'd proposed. The house had expanded over the years, additions for children, a larger kitchen, a proper medical office attached to the side. But the original porch remained, and the view was the same. He pulled out a small box. "You already gave me a ring," Rosalie said, touching the simple gold band on her finger. "This is different." Inside the box was a locket, silver engraved with mountains on one side and her initials on the other. She opened it to find 2 photographs, one of their wedding day in the kitchen, Nettie's handiwork, and one of their whole family, Cole and Rosalie, Samuel and Hope, Tommy grown tall, Mary and Grace, all of them together, all of them smiling. "When did you have this made?" "Last time I was in Silver Junction. Took me 3 tries to get the engraving right. Turns out mountains are hard to draw when your hands are meant for building, not art." Rosalie fastened it around her neck, the weight of it settling against her heart. "It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm fat and stubborn, and I have gray hair and stretch marks and—" He kissed her, stopping the words. "You're perfect," he repeated. "You were perfect 10 years ago when you rode up this mountain scared and brave and running from ghosts. You're perfect now with our children sleeping inside and our life spread out around us like a feast. You'll be perfect when we're old and gray and Tommy's running this ranch and Samuel's delivering babies and Hope's off changing the world." Rosalie pressed her forehead against his chest. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make me believe impossible things." "The same way you did for me. I just keep telling the truth until you can't help but hear it." They stood on that porch as the sun set over the mountains, and Rosalie thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The girl who believed love meant sacrifice, the woman who believed her body was wrong, the midwife who delivered other women's joy while her arms stayed empty, the wife who signed a contract because she'd forgotten how to hope for anything more. And now this version who stood in her husband's arms with a locket around her neck and a life so full she sometimes had to stop and marvel at it. Samuel came running around the corner of the house, covered in mud, Grace right behind him. "Mama, we found a frog." "Did you?" 3 frogs. Tommy says we can keep them if we build them a proper pond, and Papa said—" He stopped, looking between his parents. "Are you kissing again?" "We are," Cole said solemnly. Gross. But Samuel was grinning. Hope appeared on the porch, 2 years old and determined, dragging a wooden horse that was nearly as big as she was. "Up," she demanded, reaching for Rosalie. Rosalie scooped her up, this miracle child, this impossible gift, and Hope settled on her hip like she belonged there, because she did. They all did. Tommy came around from the barn, 15 now and almost as tall as Cole, moving with that careful grace of young men who haven't quite grown into their bodies yet. "Mary says supper's ready. She made enough to feed the whole valley, apparently, so we better eat it or she'll make us take it home." "Then we better eat it," Cole said. They trooped inside, all of them, this loud, messy, beautiful family, and filled the house with noise and laughter and the smell of Mary's cooking. Rosalie sat at the head of the table, Cole at the other end, children between them, and thought about the woman who'd stood in an empty cabin 7 years ago with 2 baby blankets and a heart full of grief. That woman wouldn't recognize this life, wouldn't believe it was possible. But that woman had been brave enough to sign a contract, brave enough to ride up a mountain, brave enough to hope when hope seemed foolish. And look what that bravery had built. After supper, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Rosalie stood at the window of their bedroom and looked out at the stars scattered across the mountain sky. Cole came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is. How 7 years ago I was delivering Helen Patterson's baby and thinking my life was over. And now—" She gestured at the house around them, the children sleeping down the hall, the life they'd built. "Now I have all this?" "You built all this." "We built it." "No." He turned her to face him. "You built it, Rosalie. I just gave you the wood and the nails and got out of your way. You're the one who took a dying town and a broken man and 2 lost babies and turned them into—" He gestured helplessly. "Into this. Into hope." She kissed him then, deep and slow and full of 10 years of learning each other, choosing each other, building something that would outlast both of them. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I know, you tell me every day." "Not with words." "No, with everything else. With the way you kiss Samuel's forehead before bed. With the way you teach Hope her letters. With the way you trust me with the hard things. With the way you rebuilt yourself and then rebuilt all of us." He cupped her face in his hands. "You love like you do everything else, Rosalie, completely, fiercely, with your whole stubborn, magnificent heart." She laughed and cried at the same time, which seemed appropriate for a life that had held both in equal measure. "Take me to bed, Cole Brennan." "Yes, ma'am." And they did what they'd done every night for 10 years. They chose each other again, in the darkness, in the quiet, in the sacred space they'd carved out of loneliness and fear. They chose love. Years later, when Rosalie was old and Samuel had children of his own, someone asked her about the secret to a good life. She thought about it for a long time. "There's no secret," she said finally. "Just choices. You choose to get up after life knocks you down. You choose to believe in yourself when everyone else says you're not enough. You choose to build instead of breaking. You choose love even when it's terrifying. You choose to keep choosing every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That's all? That's everything. And it was. Rosalie Bennett Brennan died at 72 in the house Cole built for her, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She died with Cole's hand in hers and Samuel's pocket watch, the one that had held the evidence that freed their town, resting on her chest. She died having delivered 347 babies, having saved countless lives, having transformed a dying town into a thriving community. But more than that, she died having proven wrong every person who ever said she was too much, too heavy, too broken, too anything. She died having chosen love, and love had chosen her right back. On her headstone, Cole had only 3 words carved beneath her name. She built hope. And in the mountains above Ember Hollow, in the house that 3 generations would call home, in the clinic that would serve the community for another 100 years, in the hearts of everyone she'd touched, her legacy lived on. Not because she'd been perfect, not because she'd never been afraid, but because she'd been brave enough to sign a contract at midnight, brave enough to ride up a mountain, brave enough to rebuild herself when the world said she was beyond repair, brave enough to choose hope when despair would have been easier. And that bravery had changed everything.